Hi, this is Dr. Bruner again with some suggestions about how to use the Marketing Scales Handbook. In this video, what I'm going to focus on are reliability and validity. Those are two fields you see in every review, and it's helpful if you understand what it is I'm trying to tell you and how that can be useful for your purpose. Before I start talking much about reliability and validity, the first thing I need to talk about is why use multiple items in a scale. Why not just use one question or one statement? Well, I can't go into great detail here, but what I can say is this. There's no one perfect way to measure many or most psychological constructs. Experts can even agree about what one way might be used. Also, if you just use one measure, how do you know how much of that measure is error and how much of it's measuring what you really want to measure? So I'm not suggesting you have to use lots of items. Usually a few will do. But at the other extreme, you probably don't want to use one either. Reliability has to do with the consistency of a measure to produce the same score. Now, when it comes to a multiple item measure, that means that different items are producing or triangulating on the same score. The way we measure this in modern times, over the last 30, 40, 50 years, is with something called Cronbach's alpha. There are other ways, but that's the most popular one that is reported by most psychologists, marketers, and other social scientists. Without going into too much detail, what we want to do is basically make sure that these items are consistent. They are in agreement with each other. And we look at the alpha coefficient in order to determine that. So given this information, what are you going to do with it when you look at the reliability field in a review? Well, you want to make sure that the alphas are high. Now that doesn't mean necessarily like 1. In fact, you're not going to find any that have a 1. They're going to be something between usually 0.6 and maybe something above 0.9. High is considered to be something above 0.8. Between 0.7 and 0.8 is going to be moderate, and when it gets below 0.7, then you need to be concerned about it. It's beginning to show that it doesn't have the internal consistency that you want. Also, the more studies that are reported that show it to have a high reliability, I think the more confidence you can have in it. However, keep in mind that if you're just cherry-picking items from this scale, then that alpha may not be doing a lot of good. Also, if you're going to change the items in some way, for example, you're going to rephrase them, maybe you're even going to translate them, then it's going to be up to you to do the pre-testing to determine what the reliability is and whether it's adequate for your purpose or not. Here are some made-up, fictional examples of things similar to what you might see in a review, and the first one there shows that someone named Green in 2004 reported that they had a scale with an alpha of 0.62. Now that would be considered low, and I'll leave it up to you to decide whether it's good enough or too low. Whereas the second one there shows that numerous authors have used the scale in their research and have found it to generally have reasonably good reliability. That gives you confidence that in your study it will be reliable as well, particularly if you're going to not make any changes and you're going to be using samples that are similar to the ones they use in their studies. Now, validity is even more complicated than reliability because there are more types that we can talk about and be concerned about, and they're more complicated to test. At its heart, however, validity means that a measure measures what you want to measure. I know that's complicated, but again, are you measuring what you think you're measuring? Are you measuring what you want to measure? Because as I said earlier, even the best researchers, the best scientists can disagree about how to measure something. And so it's helpful if we have ways to provide evidence that indeed we're measuring what we want to measure. Now, I'm not going to be able to explain all the different kinds of validity here, but I certainly suggest that you read about them, because you should be concerned about whether you're measuring what you want to measure. So in my reviews, you'll hear me talk about face validity, content validity, convergent validity, discriminant validity, and nomological validity. Another thing you'll hear me talk about that's not necessarily validity, but is heavily related, and that is dimensionality. And what it gets at is when you have multiple items composing a scale, are they really all measuring the same thing, or are they measuring different things, different dimensions, in other words? So what we want are items that are unidimensional. We want a scale that's unidimensional, so that when we have a score on that scale, we know what that score relates to versus it's a mixture of all kinds of things and it really doesn't have as much meaning. In the validity section of a review, you don't tend to see much information, and that's for a variety of reasons. First, the researcher may not have actually tried to validate the scale. Second, if they did do some testing, it may not have gotten into the published article, therefore I don't have it. Or in a third case, there could be a lot of validity information, but it would take up so much space and be so complicated that I don't apply it in the book, don't use it in the book. So I thoroughly suggest that readers who are interested look at the original article and find that information. But there's a role you can play in validating the scale and determining if it's appropriate for your purpose, and that's with something called face validity. You should look at the description of the scale. You should look at the items and determine if they're appropriate for your purpose. You might also consider getting the opinions of others who are expert with the population you're going to be studying and know a lot about this construct, and see if they think it's appropriate. Now, I don't report many, if any, statistics in this section, but one I sometimes report is called average variance extracted. I can't go into a lot of detail about what it means, but basically you want the AVE to be over 0.5, because what it's indicating is that the scale is going to explain more variance than what's due to measurement error. Because remember, any scale is not perfect. It's going to have error, and this is a way to quantify it. Here are some fictional examples that are similar to what you'll see in the book. For example, that first one is very typical in that you have an author who did not provide any information regarding the scale's validity. That doesn't mean the scale is invalid. It just means we don't have any evidence in support of it. The second one is dealing with something that's very common, and it's saying that there's evidence in this study done by Yellow, 2005, for the convergent and discriminant validities, and the AVE is an acceptable 0.65. The third one there, Pink, 1999, is also something that's quite common and you should look for, and it's very helpful, and that's when a person says that he or she has conducted a factor analysis on all the items in their study, certainly all the items in their scales, because again, you want the items in a scale to load together and load with high factor loadings on the same dimension, so that you have the confidence that the scale is measuring, the items are measuring one thing and one thing only. In conclusion, researchers should care about the quality of their measures. And one of the ways you show you care is by being concerned about a measure's reliability and validity. Now, I realize these are complicated issues and ones that maybe only scholars can be concerned about on a routine basis. But even practitioners have times where a certain measure must be precise. It must measure what it's supposed to measure. It must be high quality. So maybe the whole point of the study is to precisely measure something like satisfaction or product quality or purchase intention. Or maybe that construct is something you're going to measure over and over again, week after week, month after month, year after year, and it's very important to do that the right way. So that means using a multi-item scale and making sure it's reliable and valid. Because remember, even though it's easy to throw an item into a survey and think you're measuring it, it could be there's a bad measure, and a bad measure is going to lead to bad understanding, and bad understanding leads to poor decisions. You don't want to do that.